My family has a tradition. Everyone, regardless of gender, must hide their identity and never reveal their family background. Only the first descendant to conceive a child earns the right to return home and take over the family business. I was the first in the entire family to get pregnant. The moment I found out, I was so excited. I ran home without even putting on my coat. With this child, I could finally stop hiding our poverty from my husband, Ethan Moore. But when I got home and opened the door, I found my husband kissing another woman on the sofa. Ethan held the half-dressed woman and looked at me. Blair's back. Let's get a divorce. I shoved the pregnancy test back into my pocket. The divorce agreement is on the table. There's a pen next to it. Ethan's tone was flat. Blair slowly straightened her clothes, her neck covered with intense kiss marks. I walked over and picked up the agreement. 3 pages, densely written. The house goes to Ethan. Company shares go to Ethan. Savings go to Ethan. The car goes to Ethan. I get nothing. I leave with nothing. Ethan finally looked at me. The agreement includes compensation, $30,000. That's not nothing. $30,000. I've been married to this man for 3 years. $10,000 per year. The phone in my pocket pressed against the pregnancy test, jabbing painfully into my thigh. I plan to come home and tell him, Ethan, we're having a baby. You won't have to lose sleep over rent anymore. Have to grovel and drink with clients until you get stomach bleeding. I thought today would be our best day. Where's the pen? Ethan pointed to the coffee table. I crouched down to get the pen. From this angle, I could see Blair's hand resting on Ethan's waist. When I uncapped the pen, the pregnancy test nearly slipped out my pocket. I quickly pressed it back in. Sign on the last page. Date it today. Ethan's voice came from above. I signed my name, Vivian Stone, put down the pen, and stood up. Fine. The agreement needs to be filed at the courthouse to take effect. Tomorrow morning at 9. I'll come find you. After speaking, Ethan picked up his phone and unlocked it right in front of me. Scrolling to his contacts, he changed my label from my darling wife to Vivian Stone. Then he closed his phone and put it back in his pocket. Ethan actually turned and went into the kitchen. 3 years, and he'd never cooked for me. Once I'd asked him if he could cook. He said no, said he couldn't even fry an egg without burning it. I went back to the bedroom and grabbed my important documents and a cloth bag containing a few things I brought from home when I got married, things that had nothing to do with Ethan. When I came out and passed the kitchen, Ethan was cutting tomatoes. The knife thumped against the cutting board. He didn't look up. I changed my shoes at the door. Blair followed and leaned against the door frame. Vivian, I don't know if I should say this. Go ahead. When Ethan's with me, he never sighs. In these 3 years with you, I've heard him sigh so many times on the phone. She lowered her head, her voice soft. Maybe you two really are compatible. I looked at her. Ethan sighed because of broken funding chains, clients backing out, the company nearly collapsing. Every crisis, I've been the one supporting him from behind. After he sighed, the next day he'd wake up and the problem would be solved. He thought it was luck. You're right. I bent down to tie my shoelaces. We're not compatible. You're right. I bent down to tie my shoelaces. We're not compatible. The moment the door closed, Blair, his voice came from inside. Ethan, let's change the door lock code. I want to set it to our anniversary. I moved into a studio apartment near the university. That rented for $300 a month. Next door was a restaurant. Cooking oil fumes seeped in through the window cracks. I sat on the hard bed and stared at the pregnancy test for a long time. 2 bright pink lines, piercingly clear. The next morning, Ethan's mother called Vivian. Have you finished packing? I'm packing. Don't bother with those clothes of yours. They're nothing special anyway. Also, those pickles you used to make. Blair said they're pretty good. She wants the recipe. I'd made pickles for 3 years. Ethan ate them every day. My mother-in-law had never praised them once. I'm not giving it to her. What kind of attitude is that? Her mother-in-law immediately changed her tone. You're already divorced, and you're still being petty. Blair's family has real status. She's doing you a favor by asking for your pickle recipe. What status? Blair's parents run an import-export company in New York. Not everyone's a supermarket cashier like you. Her mother-in-law lowered her voice. Vivian, I'll be honest with you. I was never really satisfied when Ethan married you in the first place. Not giving her the pickle recipe. Do you have anything else to ask? My mother-in-law hung up angrily. Half an hour later, Ethan sent a message. My mom says you had a bad attitude. We're already divorced. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. I didn't reply. I turned my phone face down on the bed and touched my stomach. In 3 months, I'd start showing. By then, I'd return to the family as the only heir, who'd successfully conceived and take over everything. Ethan's company that he'd worked so hard to build was worth $3 million. In front of the Stone family, that wasn't even pocket change. The day my prenatal test results came back, I sat on a bench in the hospital corridor in a daze. The doctor said everything was normal. The baby was healthy and told me to watch my nutrition and rest. The baby is healthy. I repeated those words 3 times. Vivian. I looked up. Blair stood at the end of the corridor, holding a bag of fruit. She smiled and walked over. What a coincidence you're at this hospital, too. What are you doing here? Visiting a friend. She sat down next to me and casually glanced at my hands. I turned the test results face down, but her eyes had already caught something. Obstetrics. Blair's tone changed. No longer that sweet enthusiasm. She stared straight at my face. Vivian, you're not. It's none of your business. Pregnant. I stood up. Blair, this isn't your concern. Of course it's my concern. She stood up, too. If it's Ethan's child, then it is my business. People were passing back and forth in the corridor. She lowered her voice and moved closer. Vivian, are you planning to hide this from everyone and have the baby? And then what? Use the child to threaten Ethan? I don't need to threaten anyone. Blair watched my reaction as if confirming something. She pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to me. What's this? Open it. Inside the envelope was an ultrasound report, with Blair's name at the top, dated 2 weeks ago. It clearly stated intrauterine early pregnancy. 7 weeks. I'm pregnant too. Blair put away her smile and looked at me seriously. Ethan already knows. He's thrilled. He bought a ton of pregnancy supplies. So you understand now his first child can only be born to me. Stared at that ultrasound report. 7 weeks pregnant. Blair had only returned to the country yesterday. 7 weeks ago, she was abroad. This ultrasound had the stamp of the city's maternal and child health hospital. The timeline didn't match, but I said nothing. Now wasn't the time to expose her. Think about it. Blair patted my shoulder before things get messy. She turned and left. I clutched that ultrasound report. You say you're pregnant too. 7 weeks ago you were abroad. But the ultrasound has this city stamp. Blair, what the hell are you? The next day at 10 a.m., Ethan appeared at the door of my studio apartment. I know. He stood outside. His expression complicated. Not angry, more like a kind of patronizing helplessness. Know what? That you're pregnant. Blair told me she hadn't kept her promise after all. Ethan walked in and looked around the room, less than 100 square feet, and frowned. Vivian Stone, what are you planning to do with this child? Have it. Have it. And then what? His voice rose slightly. You make $3,500 a month. You can barely support yourself. You don't need to worry about me. I'm worried about myself. Ethan sat on the only plastic chair, hands clasped. Blair's pregnant too. You know that, right? She's further along than you already. 7 weeks she showed me the ultrasound, right? Ethan nodded. Let me be clear. My first child should be with Blair. Yours isn't appropriate. Ethan Moore, are you sure you want me to abort your child? We're already divorced. Even if you have this child, it'll be a single-parent family. That's not good for anyone. He stood up. Get an abortion. I'll pay for the procedure and nutrition costs. Is $50,000 enough? The door was pushed open from outside. My mother-in-law. She walked in carrying a plastic bag and looked around. This is where you're living. My mother-in-law put the plastic bag on the table. There's $20,000 in there for the abortion, plus the $30,000 from Ethan. That's $50,000 total. Enough for you to start over. I told you I'm keeping the child. My mother-in-law's face darkened. Vivian, don't be ungrateful. You know what Blair's family is like. She's Ethan's legitimate wife. You're carrying a bastard. This isn't a bastard. It's Ethan Moore's child. If my son doesn't acknowledge it, then it isn't. My mother-in-law's voice rose. You think getting pregnant means you can latch onto our family? Vivian Stone, I'll say this one last time. Ethan didn't look up from his phone. Get rid of the child, and we'll part on good terms. If you don't, I'll go to court and apply for a paternity test and fight for custody. I have a house and a company. You have nothing. The court will award me the child, and then I'll let Blair raise this child. Let Blair raise my child. That sentence was like a knife dabbing precisely into me. My mother-in-law pushed me. Did you hear? Don't think pregnancy gives you leverage. You're nothing. In front of us. Ethan's phone screen lit up. A message from Blair popped up. I glimpsed a line of text. Ethan, is it handled? I bought your favorite cheesecake. Ethan replied, locked the screen, looked up at me waiting for my answer. My mother-in-law stood beside him with her arms crossed, like a supervisor. I touched my stomach. This child was the Stone family heir. The child my entire family had waited over a decade for. Ethan wanted to fight for custody. He had no idea who he was challenging. I took out my phone and found a number I hadn't called in 3 years. I dialed. It was answered after one ring. "Dad, come pick me up. I'm pregnant." Ethan and my mother-in-law both looked at me. My father's voice came through the phone very calm, but every word carried undeniable weight. "Give me 20 minutes. I hung up. Ethan frowned. "Who did you call?" "My father." My mother-in-law laughed mockingly. "Your father? Didn't you say your father was a farmer in the countryside? Calling some old farmer to back you up?" I put my phone back in my pocket. "Ethan Moore, you just said you want to fight for custody." "That's right." "Fine, then wait." The ticking of the cheap plastic wall clock above my bed seemed to amplify in the silence that followed. 20 minutes, my mother-in-law scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer that wrinkled her heavily powdered face. "What's he going to do, drive his tractor down the interstate? Or maybe he's taking the Greyhound bus." "Vivian, this is exactly why Ethan is leaving you. You live in a fantasy world. You always have." Ethan didn't even look amused. He just looked exhausted, pinching the bridge of his nose like I was a stubborn child refusing to put away a toy. "Vivian, stop playing games. You're stalling. You think calling your dad is going to change anything? Even if he gets here, what's a retired farmer going to do? Yell at me?" I brought $30,000. My mother brought 20. That's $50,000 cash right here. It's more money than your family has ever seen in their lives. "Keep your money," I said, my voice eerily calm. I leaned back against the cheap headboard. "You're going to need it." Ethan let out a sharp, irritated breath. "Fine. We'll wait 20 minutes. When your dad gets here, I'll explain it to him man to man. Maybe he has more sense than you do. He'll know 50 grand is a gold mine for a woman in your position." He pulled out his phone, likely texting Blair, completely unbothered by the fact that he was sitting in his ex-wife's dingy apartment, plotting the erasure of his own child. His mother, meanwhile, began inspecting the grease-stained walls with overt disgust, making a show of pulling her designer knockoff coat tighter around her shoulders. 15 minutes passed. Then, the low, vibrating hum of heavy engines began to rattle the thin glass of my apartment window. It wasn't the chaotic noise of regular city traffic. It was a synchronized, deep purr, like a fleet of predators prowling into the narrow street. The scent of cooking oil from the restaurant next door was suddenly overwhelmed by the smell of expensive exhaust. A sharp squeal of tires echoed outside, followed by the heavy, authoritative thud of car doors closing in unison. Ethan glanced at the window, annoyed. "What is going on out there? Is there a parade in this dump?" He stood up and peered through the grime-streaked glass. His posture, previously relaxed and patronizing, instantly stiffened. His breath hitched. "What is it, Ethan?" his mother asked, stepping up behind him. She gasped. I didn't need to look. I knew what was outside. "Whose cars are those?" Ethan muttered, his voice dropping an octave. That's a convoy of Maybach S680s, 6 of them, and a Rolls-Royce Phantom." "What the hell is a billionaire doing on this street?" Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Not one pair of shoes, but several. Firm, disciplined. The kind of footsteps that owned whatever floor they walked on. Bang, bang, bang. The knock wasn't a request. It was a demand. Before Ethan could even move, the flimsy door to my studio apartment was pushed open, the cheap lock snapping with a pathetic crack. 2 men in immaculately tailored charcoal suits stepped in, their eyes sweeping the room with cold, clinical precision. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Ethan barked, his bravado returning for a fleeting second. "You can't just break in here." The men didn't even acknowledge his existence. They stepped aside, creating a pathway. A man walked into the cramped room. He was in his late 50s, his silver hair swept back perfectly. He wore a bespoke 3-piece suit that probably cost more than the entire building we were standing in. His presence consumed the space, suffocating in its authority. His eyes, a piercing, icy gray, landed instantly on me. "Dad," I said quietly. Ethan froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His jaw went slack, his eyes darting frantically from me to the imposing man standing in the doorway. "Dad." Ethan choked out, the words scraping against his throat. He looked at the man again, his brain desperately trying to process the data. Then, recognition hit him like a physical blow. Ethan was a businessman. He had spent the last 3 years desperately trying to climb the corporate ladder, memorizing the faces of the city's titans, hoping to one day breathe their air. You, Ethan stammered, stumbling back a step until his calves hit the plastic
chair.
You're Arthur Stone, the chairman of Vanguard Holdings. The Stone family. Arthur Stone didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the peeling wallpaper, the tiny window, and finally, the two pink lines on the pregnancy test sitting on the bedside table. A slow, warm smile broke across his normally ruthless features. Vivian, my father said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded absolute obedience. You look too thin, but you've done it. The exile is over. Arthur Stone, my mother-in-law shrieked, her voice trembling. Ethan, what is she talking about? This is her father? The farmer? Shut up, Mom. Ethan hissed, his hands trembling visibly. He's not a farmer. Vanguard Holdings owns half the commercial real estate in New York. They own the
banks.
They own everything. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a manic, terrified confusion. Vivian, what is this? Why is Arthur Stone calling you his daughter? I slowly stood up from the bed, smoothing down my shirt. I didn't look at Ethan with anger. I looked at him with nothing. My family has a rule, Ethan, I said, my voice steady and cold. Generational. Wealth breeds laziness. It breeds arrogance. To inherit the Stone family empire, every descendant must strip themselves of their name, their money, and their
background.
We must live at the absolute bottom of society, unassisted, until one of us proves capable of continuing the bloodline. The first to conceive a child inherits the entirety of the Stone syndicate. I picked up the pregnancy test and slipped it into my pocket. I won, I said simply. And, because of your impatience, you lost. Ethan's knees gave out. He collapsed back into the plastic chair, the flimsy material groaning under his weight. You're a billionaire.
You've been a
billionaire this whole time. I was your wife, I corrected him. I was the woman who stayed up until 3 a.m., rewriting your flawed business proposals. I was the woman who secretly sold my only heirloom watch to anonymously fund your first seed round when you were crying on the kitchen floor about going bankrupt. I gave you 3 years of loyalty, Ethan. And you gave me a $30,000 divorce agreement and a mistress. Vivian, wait, Ethan stammered, reaching a hand out toward me. The panic in his eyes was absolute. Vivian, we can fix this. We're having a baby. We don't need the divorce. The paperwork hasn't been filed yet. I'll tear it up right now. Touch her. Arthur Stone spoke for the first time since greeting me, and I will have my men break every finger on your hand. The temperature in the room plummeted. Ethan yanked his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. Arthur snapped his fingers. One of the bodyguards stepped forward, dropping a thick manila folder onto the small table right next to the plastic bag of money Ethan's mother had brought. I had my intelligence division do a preliminary sweep of your life the moment Vivian called me, Arthur said, his tone conversational but dripping with venom. Ethan Moore, CEO of Moore Technologies. Valuation, $3 million.
A
pathetic sum, but apparently enough to inflate your ego into thinking you could discard my daughter. Arthur glanced at the plastic bag on the table. $50,000 to abort. The sole heir to a $500 billion empire. It is almost comical. Ethan's mother, trembling like a leaf, tried to salvage the situation. Mr. Stone, sir, there's been a misunderstanding. We love Vivian. It's just she was being unreasonable, and Blair.
Yes.
Blair Sterling, my father interrupted, opening the folder. I saw her name in the report. She claims to be 7 weeks pregnant, correct? I looked at my father. She showed me an ultrasound today, dated 2 weeks ago, from the city maternal hospital. Arthur let out a dry, rasping laugh. He pulled a glossy photograph from the folder and tossed it onto the table. Look at it, Mr. Moore. Go ahead. Ethan, his hands shaking violently, picked up the photo. I looked over his shoulder. It was a medical document, highly classified, pulled straight from a private hospital's secure server. Blair Sterling, my father said, adjusting his cuffs, was in Geneva 7 weeks ago. But more importantly, 3 years ago, Blair Sterling contracted a severe pelvic infection following a botched cosmetic procedure in Miami. The infection resulted in a bilateral salpingectomy, the surgical removal of both fallopian tubes. Ethan stared at the paper, his breathing turning ragged.
No, she showed
me the ultrasound. She bought baby clothes. She bought a JPEG on the dark web for $300 and photoshopped her name onto it. Arthur corrected coldly. She cannot have children, mister.
More.
She never will. She simply wanted your rising company and knew a fake pregnancy was the fastest way to force my daughter out of the picture. No, Ethan whispered. The realization shattered over him.
He had thrown away
A literal empire and his actual flesh and blood child for a barren liar who manipulated him. Vivian, Ethan sobbed, suddenly dropping to his knees on the dirty linoleum
floor.
He didn't care about his pride anymore. He grabbed the hem of my jeans. Vivian, please. I was blind. I was stupid. I love you. I swear I love you.
She
Tricked me. I'll throw her out today. We can be a family. Our baby needs a father. I looked down at the man I had served for 3 years. The man who, just minutes ago, had threatened to take my child and let his mistress raise it. I gently stepped back, pulling my jeans from his grasp. You told me to sign the divorce papers, Ethan. I did, I said softly.
You
Changed my contact name to Vivian Stone right in front of me. I am Vivian Stone, and you are nothing. I turned to my father. I'm ready to go home, Dad. Arthur nodded. He looked at the bodyguards. Leave the $50,000. Consider it a charitable donation to the destitute. But make a call to the
bored.
I want more technologies delisted, dismantled, and bankrupt by the time we finish dinner. Yes, Mr. Stone, the bodyguard replied. Wait, please. You can't do this, Ethan screamed, scrambling toward the door. But a bodyguard shoved him back into the room so hard he crashed into the table, knocking the cheap plastic bag of cash onto the floor. Bundles of $100 bills spilled out, scattering across the cheap linoleum like useless green paper. His mother wailed, falling to her knees to gather the bills, clutching them to her chest as she cried over her son's ruined future. I didn't look back. I walked down the narrow, grimy hallway, stepped out into the crisp evening air, and climbed into the back of the waiting Maybach.
The
heavy, bulletproof door closed with a solid, isolating thud, shutting out the noise of my past forever. The Stone family estate wasn't just a house, it was a fortress carved into the cliffs of the Hudson Valley. When the convoy passed through the wrought iron gates, the entire family was waiting on the grand steps. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all dressed in mourning colors, and ironic traditions signifying the death of their own ambitions. I stepped out of the car. The family bowed their heads. I was escorted to the master study, a room lined with mahogany and centuries of
wealth.
My grandfather, the patriarch who had instituted the cruel inheritance rule, sat by the fireplace. He looked at my stomach, then at my eyes, and nodded.
Once.
You survived the dirt, he rasped. Now you rule the sky. Within 24 hours, the transition of power was absolute. I was named CEO of Vanguard Holdings. My first order of business wasn't a celebration.
It was a
surgical strike. Ethan had been right about one thing. I was a fast learner. For 3 years I had managed his fragile supply chains and balanced his tight margins. I knew exactly where his weaknesses were. On Tuesday morning, More Technologies lost its primary chip supplier.
A
subsidiary of Vanguard Holdings simply terminated the contract, citing a strategic pivot. By Tuesday afternoon, Ethan's secondary investors, who relied heavily on Vanguard's goodwill in other sectors, pulled their funding simultaneously. By Wednesday, More Technologies defaulted on its loans. The bank, owned by the Stone Syndicate, called in the entire debt. I sat in my penthouse office, overlooking the Manhattan skyline, reading the reports on an iPad. The speed of his destruction was almost boring. Ms. Stone, my assistant, a razor-sharp woman named Clara, stepped into the office. We have an update on Blair Sterling. Go ahead, I said, not looking up from the screen. Sterling Imports is heavily leveraged. They owe $6 million to an offshore logistics firm. We bought the debt this morning, Clara said smoothly. We've initiated immediate collection. Her parents are currently filing for bankruptcy. Good. And Blair? She is currently at a high society charity gala downtown, accompanied by Ethan.
More.
It seems he hasn't told her that his company is liquidating today. He is likely trying to secure a last-minute angel investor at the gala to save himself. I set the iPad down. A slow smile crept onto my face. Clara, I said, standing up and smoothing down the immaculate lines of my custom Tom Ford suit. Have my car brought around. It's been a while since I attended a gala. The crystal room at the Waldorf was drowning in champagne, silk, and desperate networking. I arrived unannounced, but when the organizers saw the black titanium Vanguard card, the velvet ropes practically evaporated. I stood on the mezzanine balcony, looking down at the crowd. It didn't take long
To spot them.
Ethan looked haggard. His tuxedo was tailored, but it hung loosely on his frame. He was sweating, cornering a wealthy venture capitalist by the bar, talking a mile a minute. The investor looked bored, glancing at his watch and trying to pull away. Blair stood nearby, wearing a tight crimson gown that suspiciously accentuated a tiny, non-existent bump. She was sipping what looked like sparkling water, playing the part of the expectant mother perfectly, laughing with a group of socialites who had no idea her family's company was currently being dismantled by men in cheap suits downtown. I descended the grand staircase. The crowd naturally parted for me, sensing the shift in gravity. The murmur started before I even reached the floor.
People
Recognized the Stone family detail that flanked me. I walked straight toward the bar. "Please, Mr. Henderson, just a bridge loan." Ethan was begging the investor, his voice cracking with desperation. 50% equity. I'll give you 50% of more tech for $2 million. I just need to cover the margin call by midnight. "Ethan," I said. The single word cut through the jazz music and the clinking glasses like a
scythe.
Ethan froze. He turned around slowly. When he saw me, his eyes dilated in sheer shock. I wasn't the woman in the faded jeans and cheap oversized sweaters who cooked him dinner. I wore a backless emerald gown, a diamond necklace that cost more than his entire life's earnings, resting against my collarbone, and the cold, unyielding stare of a billionaire. "Vivian," he whispered. Blair turned around at the sound of my name. Her condescending smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked at my jewelry, at the bodyguards behind me, and finally, at the absolute dominance in my posture. "Vivian?" Blair stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I own the building, Blair," I said casually, taking a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. I didn't drink it, I just held it, tracing the rim with my finger. "I hear congratulations are in order. How is the baby?" 8 weeks now." Blair swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Ethan, who looked like he was about to vomit. It's fine. We're very happy." "That's a medical miracle," I said, raising my voice just enough for the surrounding socialites to tune in. "Considering you haven't had fallopian tubes since 2023. The silence that fell over our immediate circle was deafening. Blair's face flushed a violent, mottled red. "Excuse me? How dare you?" "Ethan, tell her to leave." Ethan didn't move. He stared at Blair, his chest heaving. "Blair," he said, his voice hollow. "Is it true?" "Of course not," she shrieked, her facade crumbling. "She's just a jealous, bitter ex-wife who works at a supermarket." "Ethan, do something." "She's Vivian Stone," Ethan whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "Her father is Arthur Stone, Vanguard Holdings." Blair stopped breathing. The name hit her like a physical blow. Vanguard, the company that had just aggressively called in her parents' debt 3 hours ago. "You," Blair pointed a trembling finger at me. "You did this." "My father called me crying, 'You ruined my family.'" "You ruined yourself, Blair," I said coldly. "You targeted a married man, faked a pregnancy, and tried to force me into an abortion. I simply accelerated the consequences." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper.
I
Dropped it onto the floor at Blair's feet.
It was her real medical file.
"Pick it up, Ethan," I commanded. Ethan, entirely broken, bent down and picked up the paper. He read the surgical
notes.
The bilateral self-ingectomy. He stared at the words for a long time. Then, he looked up at Blair. "You lied to me," Ethan said, his voice trembling with a terrifying, quiet rage. "I threw away my marriage. I gave up my real child for a lie. You barren
Bitch."
"Ethan, please," Blair cried, reaching for him. He violently shoved her away. Blair stumbled backward in her stilettos, crashing into a waiter. A tray of champagne flutes shattered onto the marble floor, splashing all over her expensive crimson gown. The entire gala stopped to stare at the humiliating spectacle. Ethan dropped the paper, turning back to me. He fell to his knees right there in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the city's elite. "Vivian," he wept, openly sobbing, ignoring the camera flashes that suddenly started popping around us. "Vivian, I'm sorry. I have nothing. The company is
Gone.
The house is foreclosed. My mother is living in a motel.
Please. I beg. You.
I am the father of your child. You can't let me die in the gutter. I looked down at the man who had promised to protect me, the man who had sat at a table and watched his mother offer me $50,000 to kill the heir to a dynasty. Do you remember what you said to me when I asked for a fair division of assets? I asked quietly. My voice meant only for him. Ethan looked up, tears streaming down his face, his snot mixing with his sweat. You said, I get the house. I get the company. You get nothing. You leave with nothing. I recited perfectly. I turned away from him, handing my untouched champagne glass to my bodyguard. You leave with nothing, Ethan, I said. Enjoy the rest of your life. I walked out of the Waldorf as the security guards dragged a screaming, hysterical Blair and a weeping Ethan toward the service exit. I didn't look back. I had a prenatal vitamin to take and an empire to run. 5 years later. Mommy, look. I looked up from the quarterly earnings report. My 4-year-old son, Leo, was running across the sprawling manicured lawns of the Stone estate, chasing a golden retriever puppy. The sun caught his dark hair he inherited from a man he would never meet, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, were entirely mine. Careful, Leo, I called out, smiling softly. Arthur sat across from me at the patio table, sipping a black coffee. He looked older, but content. He watched his grandson with a rare, genuine warmth. The Vanguard merger with European tech went through this morning, Arthur noted, setting his cup down. You outmaneuvered them flawlessly, Vivian. I couldn't have done it better myself. They underestimated a mother fighting for her son's legacy, I replied, signing the final page of the document and handing it to Clara, who stood diligently nearby. Speaking of the past, Clara murmured, leaning in slightly. I thought you might want to know. It popped up on my auxiliary radar this morning. What is it? I asked, completely unbothered. Clara pulled out a tablet. Ethan Moore. He was arrested last night. I paused. For what? Grand larceny. Apparently, he's been working as a mid-level manager at a logistics warehouse in Queens. He tried to embezzle $40,000 to pay off his mother's medical debt and gambling loans. He was caught on camera. He's facing 5 to 10 years. I looked at the tablet. There was a mugshot. Ethan's hair was thinning, his eyes sunken and hollow. He looked a decade older than he actually was. The arrogance that had defined him was entirely gone, replaced by the permanent, crushing exhaustion of poverty. And Blair? I asked. She works at a nail salon in Staten Island, Clara replied smoothly. Married a mechanic. They live in a rented basement. I stared at the screen for a moment. Once, long ago, looking at Ethan's face would have sparked a flurry of emotions, love, then betrayal, then hatred. Now, there was nothing, just the cold, indifferent observation of a stranger. Delete the file, Clara, I said, waving my hand dismissively. Take him off the radar. He doesn't exist to us anymore. Yes, Miss Stone. Clara tapped the screen, erasing Ethan Moore into the digital abyss. I stood up from the table and walked down the stone steps toward the lawn. Leo saw me coming and ran into my arms, giggling as I scooped him up. I held him tight, feeling his small heartbeat against my chest. I had played the game. I had hidden in the dirt, endured the humiliation, and survived the ultimate betrayal. But standing here holding the sole heir to the Stone Empire, looking out over the sprawling lands that belonged entirely to us, I knew the truth. I didn't just win the game. I changed the rules forever.